For me, racism means that we're separated from everybody else. Like I feel like I'm an immigrant in our own country. It's underlying. They don't say anything, but you know it's there. So I feel it. You know, I feel even when I'm in the building I'm at. I feel like a minority because it's all different cultures. Except you know, it sounds like it feels like they want us out of there, our native people.
Well, in Montreal, you get a certain number of people who are worried about the number of immigrants from different countries, different shades of skin color and all this kind of thing coming in. I think it's a great shame because where integration happens in most parts of Montreal, it works extremely well. It's a happy city. There are enclaves, though, which need better integration at a speedier rate.
People need to be willing to talk about it and not just kind of disregard it as, oh, we're not going to get into the race issue again, because once you do that, you kind of put it to the side, you sweep it under the rug, when just because you don't feel it yourself personally doesn't mean it doesn't affect other people in society.
Qu'est-ce qui me préoccupe vraiment, je pense que c'est plutôt l'ignorance, la peur, et puis le manque de confiance entre nous les humains. C'est ça que je trouve qui crée, parce que je trouve qu'en réalité, ça n'existe. Le mot racisme, c'est un mot.
Quelqu'un peut avoir peur de quelqu'un d'autre, c'est pas du racisme, c'est de la peur. Le racisme, c'est vraiment une idée de supériorité.
There's entitlement attitude where because we're born here, we're special or different than everybody else. It's just luck that we're born here or wherever. So embrace it and know that we're all here, we're all Canadians. I think the beauty for Canada is that we accept all people and give everybody an opportunity to be themselves, to worship their worship, to have their clothing the way they want clothing, and be respectful.
I think it's the everyday racism that's the biggest problem. It means a lot to me because I'm always self-critical and thinking about how racism comes out of my mouth, even in ways that I don't want it to. And I can't imagine, you know, my awareness is only growing, and so that blatant racism goes that much deeper for a lot of people. And I myself am a very, very privileged white woman, but that's not the case for all of us.
They should be teaching children, you know, it's not the color of a person's skin. The teachers, this is their job to do that. Don't look at a person's skin. It shouldn't be the color of their skin that should, you know, qualify them for even a job.
Welcome. I'm Mary Link, and welcome in Arabic is marhaba, and I grew up here in the Arabic community, and it's really my pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you for coming. I'm a producer and documentary maker with CBC's national radio show Ideas, and I'm proudly working here out of Halifax, CBC. And in the past, I've done producing for The Current. We've just heard from a few voices across the country weighing in on some of the most pressing issues of race in Canada today. This is The Current's first of a series of public forums called Facing Race, a really difficult but really important topic to be talking about. Before I go any farther, I just want to acknowledge that the event here tonight is in Mi'kmaq, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. There will be other town halls in this series, one in Vancouver and one in Montreal. But tonight, we are talking about the legacy, the deep and tragic legacy of anti-Black racism in our province. And there's a lot, sadly, to be said about that. Also, I want to let you know that everybody here in the audience and on Facebook Live tonight, we want you to be part of this. And we're going to take some of your questions later on near the end. So please feel free to talk. We'll go around with a microphone. 2, just housekeeping issues. There's the bathroom in the back to the right. And if you do have a cell phone, if you wouldn't mind turning it off, just because we're going to air this on CBC Radio, on The Current. And it is, and I'm really proud that CBC is doing this. It means a lot that we're doing this, and we have to do it more, and we haven't done enough, everyone in the media, and this is really, really important. I want to introduce the host of this town hall. She's also the host of The Current. She's my colleague, she's a dear friend, and she's one of the most highly respected journalists, esteemed journalists, not just nationally, but internationally. And she's really proud to be here tonight. Anna Maria Tremonti.
Thank you, Mary. Hi. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, everyone, for coming out on a Friday night to our first town hall series on the most pressing issues of race and racism in Canada. The town hall that you are part of tonight will air on Wednesday, the 21st of February, on radio through the CBC radio app as well. It will be available online as well at cbc.ca/thecurrent and on podcast. This event is being Facebook lived, and this video will live online there as well. When you hear this on the radio, it will be a 90-minute version that is edited and cut down to fit our show. So we'll go a little longer maybe in some things, and we'll have to squeeze it in, but we will spend 90 minutes of our program on this. If you're tweeting about this, by the way, please use the hashtag CBCFacingRace. I'm going to ask the panelists for our first half hour to join me up here as we get ready for the show. Louise DeLille, Lucy Nickerson, and Ingrid Waldron are going to come up and get ready to talk to me in our first half hour. Now, before we begin the show, I have to let you in on a dirty little secret of the Current. We go to air in 5 different time zones. So when I go to air in my Toronto studio, I go to air for you live in Atlantic Canada. And that means if I make mistakes, if there are legal concerns, if there are flubs, if stuff goes wrong, we fix it for all the other time zones. You guys hear all the mistakes. We've got no way out of that one. So tonight you get to see again and hear radio, warts and all, how it's made. And if we really do mess up tonight, we'll cut it out. Anyway, that's how, as we roll over, we try to fix it. Because sometimes I make mistakes. So anyway. And on Wednesday, when you listen to the show on the radio, you will hear the edited version. But we always edit just to be, we always stay true to conversation. We edit for time. We're here in the flesh today, and we want you to be part of it. And so when I welcome the show in a moment, and in between segments, I am going to be looking for some applause and cheering if you care to, so we can try it out, you know. I'm going to say, I'm Anna Maria Tremonti, and you're listening to a special edition of The Current. Perfect. So you're really part of our theme this way. But now we're ready. Everybody's ready behind me. So I'm going to sit down and we're going to begin the program. I'm going to tell you that we first begin with some voices in Shelburne. We have voices from Shelburne as well, but in Shelburne. And a warning, in the first few minutes of the tape we are about to hear, you will hear some racially charged strong language.
Be like a little rink there, right? A little. We made it. We used to go skating there in the wintertime, and we skate till our parents come to get us. We were so late getting home those nights. Oh my dear.
So what I'm looking at over here, what did it look like when you were a kid? Like over there, what was there?
Old cars, clothes, papers, barrels of tin barrels, whatever you could think of old food, everything. This dump is now closed, but we don't know if it's been closed properly. We don't know what's seeping into the ground. You're looking at years and years of chemicals and garbage, everybody's household garbage, every industry that's in the community's garbage.
You call this environmental racism. Why do you use that term?
Because it's right in the middle of our community. It's in our community. And it's not in the other community. At the north end is the where the white settlers or the white people live. This is where the black people live.
At first, we were drinking the water, and then Herbie said, "You folks is going to get cancer drinking that water." And I said, "Well, we must stop this." And we did, and we bought water.
While I sat in school down the road, Sheldon, he's gone. And Roy.
Who else? Who else is gone?
The whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
The whole neighborhood. I'm just so told. I am the oldest one.
You are the oldest man left. Yes, you are.
Yeah. I never realized that. Never realized that.
It was horrible. Couldn't open a window. You couldn't open your doors. You had to keep your windows shut all night long.
Couldn't put the clothes on the line?
No. Have to wait till night, because the smoke would be in the clothes, and it would be terrible. You had to wash them all over again. A lot of people made a complaint about it, but nothing stopped them. They went ahead and build it anyway. To me, it was like we were nothing. How do I put it? Well, we were niggers. We were black, and it didn't matter. We could live through anything.
The people you just heard live in Shelburne, a community of fewer than 2,000 people tucked into the top of an inlet on Nova Scotia's South Shore. And they say that in that small place, they are living with a legacy of racism, of government decisions that force them and generations of their black neighbors to grow up in the environmental shadow of a messy, smoldering, smelly, and ultimately dangerous landfill site. They worry it has contributed to cancers and early deaths, but they do not have and cannot get the full studies to back up with hard science what they have been seeing and living for decades. In a moment, we'll hear more from them and from a sociologist who has been tracking and mapping the locations of landfills and industrial sites in Nova Scotia and has raised questions about the patterns she sees. And we aren't stopping there. This is the first of the Current's 3-city tour called Facing Race, and we have come to Nova Scotia because of the rich and complicated history of African Canadians here. Nova Scotia's black communities can trace their roots to the 1700s, when Africans victimized by the slave trade were brought here in chains, and others on the other side of the US border, also enslaved, were promised their freedom and land to settle by Britain if they fought on the British side during the American Revolution. Of course, the black loyalists never received all that they were promised, and though black communities grew and thrived, they also suffered. Today, their descendants can still point to the consequences of those early days in the political and social reality in which they now live. We will hear about belonging, gentrification, and the changing face of historically black communities in this province. We're asking who's left behind when neighborhoods develop. We'll also hear about violence against black women and girls and ask what is missing in the growing conversations around sexual violence. In our last half hour, we will invite members of our audience and those of you joining us on Facebook Live to share your experiences and to raise your questions. We are in Halifax before a packed house in the sparkling and splendid new Central Library. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti, and this is a special edition of The Current, Facing Race. And you can read about the stories you hear today on our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent. And please go ahead and tweet about this show with the hashtag #CBCFacingRace. We're going to start with two people you heard briefly in our opening tape. They both live in the south end of Shelburne. Louise DeLille is the co-founder of the South End Environmental Justice Society, SEED. Lucy Nickerson is her neighbor and friend. They call their neighborhood a community of widows, and they say most of the men in their community have died of cancer. Hello to you.
Hello to you.
Louise, the last voice we heard on that tape from my visit this week to Shelburne belongs to your mom, Ruth.
Belongs to my mother.
How old is she?
She's 85 years old in March.
She talked about not being able to hang her clothes on the line because of the smoke and the ash from the dump. Were they burning stuff all the time?
The dump was a fire all the time. And when it was burning, the smoke was so thick it was like fog. And I remember as a child her saying, I can't wash again today. I'm going to have to wait till the night when that smoke is gone so I can put these clothes on the line. We weren't rich people, so we never had a dryer. And she hated to dry clothes inside. She just hated it. That's one of the things that sticks in my mind from that time. And she would always say that someday someone's going to put an end to this. I remember she used to say that someday someone will put an end to this. And I never dreamed it would be me trying to. But here I
am. So when you were a kid, what do you remember about that dump?
Oh my goodness, Anna Maria. I remember the smell and the smoke, like I said. The smell was so, I can't express it in words what that smelled like when it was a fire, and the smoldering every day, and the rodents, the rats, and it was terrible.
How close did you live to it?
Well, less than a quarter of a mile. It was just in the yard, basically in our backyard, because the house was here, a little bit of woods, and then the dump, and was our playing area. We played as children.
And the trucks would then come in all the time too, right?
Yes. Yeah, there was always traffic up and down that road going to the dump, either from one of the shipyards dumping their stuff, one of the industries down there, the Navy base dumping their stuff, the hospital dumping its stuff. Everything bad was placed in the south end, of course. Any industry that didn't produce any kind of contaminants, really, was not in that area. All the garbage from the people that lived in the community, old clothes, magazines, old food from stores that had to be thrown out, all went to the dump and then set afire. So you can imagine what that smelled like, burning for days.
Lucy Nickerson, what do you remember about growing up near there?
Well, I always lived in the south end of town. The dump was quite an issue. The rats were quite an issue. I can remember I had my granddaughter there one day, and I said, we were baking a cake. And I said, put these in the garbage for Nanny. She says, there's no garbage bag in there, Nanny. 7 rats. 7 rats were in there. And I'm screeching and hollering to Herbie to come and do something with them. And so he got a pellet gun, and it was the only thing we could do with them. And that, but it was always rats around. It was nothing you could do.
And Louise, when did you begin to get concerned about the potential health effects of that dump?
When I first started to really, I've always been concerned about it, because it was always a conversation whenever the community got together. Everybody was always talking about the dump. And as a young person growing up, I'd hear that all the time. Whenever there was a party, everybody talked about the dump. Somebody was sick, it's the dump. Somebody was in the hospital, well, that's the dump. And I started to think about health as a young person, and I went to work at Mount St. Vincent Mother House in the health field. And then in the later years, after my brother and my father had passed away, I had the opportunity to work for Dalhousie on a project researching Black women's health. And in that research, the data showed that every single woman that we interviewed in Shelburne and other Black communities throughout this province were concerned about the dump and the effects of the dump on their health. So that's when I really started to think about it. And then I got involved with Dr. Ingrid Walden and the Enrich Project. And she asked me to do a focus group. 2 focus groups, I believe. 2 focus groups, and I gathered people from the community in for those focus groups and to talk about the dump and the health effects of the dump.
And we will get to Dr. Waldron in a minute, but I'm going to stick with the 2 of you for just another minute. Lucy, what's been the impact of all this on your family?
Well, I have no son. My son died in September at the age of 45 with multiple myeloma. It wasn't a pretty sight. It was about the worst thing I could have ever put myself through. At the end of it, I just walked over to him and I said, William, Mom's going home. I said, and she's going to get Kayla's supper. I said, and if you want to go, I said, you go. Mom loves you and we will meet again. So it hasn't been very good for me.
He was diagnosed just over a year before he died, huh?
Yeah, a little better than a year.
We asked the Nova Scotia Health Authority for cancer statistics for the south end of Shelburne. There are no numbers specifically for the south end of town, but for the town of Shelburne in general, the proportions of 3 cancer types appear to surpass those recorded for Nova Scotia as a whole: bladder, kidney, and multiple myeloma. There are not hard numbers, but you lost your son to that very cancer.
Yes, I did.
And you both live in what you call a community of widows. Why do you call it that?
Because it's mostly men that dies.
Yeah, we've lost the majority of men in our community. I mean, the next generation out from our generation, Lucy's son is a rare example, but the majority of men, like my father's generation, have all died of cancers. And the majority of people that are dying of cancers are dying of multiple myeloma in the south end, which, and it is a rare cancer. And for it to be in such a small cluster, such a large cluster in such a small spot, is very suspicious to me.
So why was the dump put there?
Why was it put there? Very good question. It was put there because it was easy for them to put it there without any repercussions from it. It was easy for them because they knew my father's generation, my mother's generation, were not going to fight them against it. They never had a voice. They never had a voice to stop it. It was put there because we were black.
They closed the dump officially in 2016.
Yes, they did.
What led to that?
Well, after the Enrich focus groups, we decided that we were going to take some action. It was time we took action because people were dying too quickly. And we said, well, the first thing we got to do is call the Nova Scotia Environment and find out if what they're doing now there is something that we can get it closed by what they're doing now. And they were dumping white metal there at the time, and oil barrels and stuff like that. And Nova Scotia Environment found that they had reason to send a letter to the town to demand that they clean it up. And they had to do that. They had a certain amount of time to do that. And from that, after that, we met with the town and told them that we wanted them to close the dump. So they decided that they were, and then they said, well, we'll leave the dump open for yard waste. They weren't closing it. If they were going to leave it open for people to get their yard waste or anything else, then it wasn't going to be open. So we went back again, and finally Mayor Mattatall closed it because we insisted on it being closed, and we were going to go as far as we had to go.
to have it closed.
This is a good time to bring in our third guest sitting up with us here. Ingrid Waldron is a sociologist, a professor at Dalhousie University. She is also the director at the Enrich Project, which stands for Environmental Noxiousness, Racial Inequalities, and Community Health Project. Welcome.
Thank you.
I have a couple of things I want to ask you. First of all, I do want to say we invited the mayor of Shelburne, Karen Matatal, to be here today. She was not available. She sent a statement. I'm going to read part of it, and I'm quoting here. The council has previously offered to assist with the testing of water and soil to further inform consideration of community concerns. However, there was not support for this. The town remains willing to assist with any testing and would work with residents and other interested parties to reduce costs, end quote. How do you interpret what the mayor is saying there?
Well, it's good to hear. I mean, it's the first time I've heard that. I actually met with the mayor when I visited Shelburne with some scientists in 2016. And she came to me privately and she said that, do you realize that a number of African Nova Scotians in this community smoke? So I don't believe this notion of environmental racism because there are high rates of smoking in the community. So I got a sense from that conversation that she was very doubtful about the issue. So I'm extremely happy to hear that she's willing to collaborate with the community, and I know Louise is interested in collaborating with her.
You are trying to do your own testing, are you not, through your Enrich project?
Yeah, many of the communities that I've visited have wanted independent water testing for some time. They simply don't trust the government to do the testing. So what we're doing is mimicking a project, a water testing project that we conducted in the African Nova Scotian community of Lincolnville. We're doing that in Shelburne, which is going to begin soon, which is to test the water, but also build capacity in the community to test their own water, and also educate the community about contaminants, enabling them to learn about contaminants, but also speak in that kind of language, the environmental science language many of them don't have, many of us don't have. So they understand water contamination and water testing. So that's something that we're planning to do very soon.
Neither the mayor nor the town councillor for your area, Rick Davis, were available to see us in Shelburne this week. If I could have seen them, I would have asked, why do you need other people to do the testing? Why isn't government taking responsibility for this? Where's the resistance coming from? They are responsible for the entire community, are they not?
Government's not necessarily responsible for water testing of wells. It's the responsibility of individual communities to do that. I think my argument is if industries or dumps or landfills are placed in communities that don't want those waste sites, then for me, they are accountable. I think government is accountable. But in the meantime, I think it's important, as people are dying, that something is done. So we've taken the step, many of us, some scientists, geologist Fred Bonner and Wilbur Menendez, who's a chemistry professor, a science professor at Nova Scotia Community College. We've taken the initiative to address some of the concerns by initiating a water testing project because people are dying. So I still believe that government is accountable because they've placed those sites there. However, in the meantime, something needs to be done, so we've taken the initiative.
You do research around environmental racism. How do you define environmental racism?
Environmental racism is a term that was coined in the early 1980s by Benjamin Chavez. It was further taken up by Robert Bullard, a professor at Texas Southern University, and it's characterized by the disproportionate location of environmental contaminants in communities of color and indigenous communities and low-income white communities. It's also very similar to what Louise mentioned. It's the lack of power that many of these communities, because they're racialized, because they're low income, the lack of power they have for resisting against the siting of these facilities in their communities. And it's also about the lack of representation of these communities on committees, boards, regulatory bodies, individuals who have a say in where these sites are located. So when you look at environmental racism, you need to look at the full breadth of environmental racism, and I would say that those three issues characterize environmental racism in the United States and in Canada.
We did contact the Nova Scotia Department of the Environment to ask them about this, and I'm going to quote part of what they sent us. We take the issue of environmental racism seriously. Government has been taking action on initiatives to address disparities, racism, and systemic discrimination that African Nova Scotians have faced for generations. There is more work to do, but we are on the right path forward in our journey of healing and resolution. This is a priority for the government of Nova Scotia. End quote. Do you see the Nova Scotia government making this a priority?
Nova Scotia government is not making this issue a priority. In 2014 and 2015, I visited 14 government departments, including Nova Scotia Environment, and no one was interested in taking up this issue. While they agreed that they needed to be more transparent and accessible in terms of sharing information to communities, none of the individuals that I visited were interested in taking up this issue. So they are not interested in it. More so, they don't have the lens, the understanding of environmental racism. When I look at environmental assessments, that's a process that you use to decide where a waste dump or landfill is placed. They don't have the understanding, the critical understanding, the sociological lens to understand why placing certain waste dumps or landfills in certain communities is problematic, particularly because you're placing them in communities that are dealing with existing vulnerabilities relating to racism, colonialism, class, income, education, lack of resources, food insecurity, and income insecurity. So unless they have that lens, which is a sociological lens, then the individuals in Nova Scotia Environment and other agencies in government don't have a full understanding of this problem.
Ingrid Waldron, you have mapped locations of industry and landfill sites in proximity to Black and Indigenous communities in the province. We'll put that up on the screen here so we can see what you've found. This is also available at cbc.ca/thecurrent, and our Facebook Live audience is able to find it on our Facebook page. Tell us what we are looking at.
Yeah, so this is a map that was developed by a health geography student, Bo Aarons, in 2016, using GIS analysis, and he mapped the location of waste dumps close to Indigenous and African Nova Scotian communities across the province. So what you're seeing is just the sites that are close to African Nova Scotian communities. So I can provide you with just a very brief list of some of the communities that are near to landfills. If you go onto the website, on the Enrich website, you will find two layers on the map. You'll see one layer for Indigenous communities across the province, and you'll see another layer for African Nova Scotian communities. So what you'll find is that waste dumps on the map are close to Shelburne, Lincolnville, Sunnyvale, Upper Big Tracadie, Monastery, Mulgrave, Trenton, Birchtown, Beachville, Lucasville, etc. And you'll also find landfills, waste dumps close to Indigenous communities like Pictou Landing First Nation, which is, to me, the worst case of environmental racism in Nova Scotia, one of the worst in Canada. Katie First Nation, Eskasoni First Nation, Member 2 First Nation, Middlebrook First Nation, etc.
That's a long list.
It's longer.
I was going to say, the et cetera tells us it's even longer.
It's important to stress, though, that this is simply another tool in the toolkit or in the toolbox. For example, if I were to visit government to make my case, for example, I would take my data, I would take my qualitative research based on the focus groups that Louise did, for example, I would take quantitative data, I will take this map, and I will take other information to make a case about environmental racism. The problem with government is they want to connect a particular landfill site and a contaminant to a particular cancer, for example, multiple myeloma, for example. You can never do that. You can never definitively say that a particular waste dump is causing a particular type of cancer. What you can say is the probability is very high that it is, which for me is sufficient. So when I take this to government, this map, and I show how close these communities are to these sites, for me, that should be enough. For government, apparently it's not.
Your team has done water testing in the African Nova Scotian community of Lincolnville. What were the results? What did you find?
So the African Nova Scotian community of Lincolnville has been concerned about a landfill since 1974, wanting independent testing, didn't want the government to do it, don't trust the government. So we decided as a team to forge ahead with that project. Wilbur Menendez at Nova Scotia Community College, Fred Bonner, a geologist, went ahead in 2016 and conducted a project there. I have to say that it's a first phase project, so what we found was that the water's generally good. We did find coliforms and E. coli in the water, and we advised community members to boil their water, and they went back to the community and addressed some of their concerns and answered questions. We found generally that the water was good. I have to stress that that was a first phase study, and we need to go back to the community to do a second phase study. But in general, because the water is running away from the community rather than running towards the community, that typically means, can't say definitively, that the community is kind of safe in terms of water contamination.
But that doesn't necessarily mean the community is safe.
No, not until we determine that from a second phase study. What we think we might find in Shelburne is something very different because the water, if I'm correct, is running towards the community. So as I said earlier, we're going to mimic the Lincolnville study in Shelburne very soon to see what's happening with the water.
And there are other concerns with Lincolnville. We have a former resident of Lincolnville in our audience. Raymond Shepherd has been advocating for environmental justice in his home community. Hello, Raymond Shepherd.
Good evening.
How has your community been affected by its proximity to that landfill?
Well, first of all, Nova Scotia has the best racism in Canada. Second of all, people come here to explore. Anyway, in Lincolnville, my community now is on life support. It's on life support mainly because the people there's less than 50 people, and many people have died, similar to Louise's community. Back when I was growing up, there was one person a year, sometimes two, or what have you. Now people are dying left, right, and center. And my father died 6 weeks ago. My sister died in August of lung cancer, and so on. And of course, people want you to know that, oh, they were smokers. But I believe that there's a correlation between the first and the second generation landfill, but the government of Nova Scotia says it's safe. I don't believe that. When you see birds lying here and there, oh, they were hit by a car. Yeah, good luck with that. So it's difficult, and because we're a poor, marginalized community and what have you, government knows they can press a button on a computer and find out who is poor and who's not, and so on. And as a result of that, we didn't have the resources to fight back. We were one of the weakest links, if you will. So they came in. They put a second generation landfill in 2006, and the first week, 57 ton came in the community.
You left Lincolnville. Why did you leave?
I left Lincolnville because I'm an asthmatic, and I was having serious asthma problems where I had to do my studies in hospital and what have you, and I was always in and out of hospital, so I left because of that. Now that I think about it, and had years to think about it, I believe that the first generation landfill affected my health. My mom also died from bowel cancer, so I think there was the correlation.
Thank you for telling us about this. We have some more questions to ask of Ingrid in relation to this. Thank you, Raymond Shepherd. Ingrid Waldron, there was a private member's bill introduced by the NDP, was there not, in the Nova Scotia legislature, proposing province-wide consultation on environmental racism? What happened to that?
Yes, in Christmas time, 2014, I connected with Lenore Zan, an MLA for the NDP, the first, perhaps only, MLA who returned my call at the end of 2014, agreeing to meet with me. We met at Starbucks on Barrington, and she said, why don't we develop a private members bill? I have to say that they typically don't pass, but at least this would give increased awareness about environmental racism, and we could also do a press conference just to bring attention to the issue, and I agreed. We met with 3 lawyers at Dal's Schulich School of Law, and I provided her with data from the focus groups and other information, literature reviews, and she created a private members bill that would ask government to consult with communities, communities including African Nova Scotians, Indigenous communities, and Acadian communities to address environmental racism. The bill was introduced in the legislature April 29th. It was put forward to second reading in November 25th, 2015, but it did not pass to law amendments. So when it goes through law amendments, then it becomes legislation, I believe. So that was a bit of a blow to me. And then it was reintroduced. So I'm happy to say that although it wasn't passed, it has been reintroduced twice. It was reintroduced in 2016 under another number bill, so it's Bill 111 in 2015, and again in
Always
2017.
by private members? Or
Private members
the
bill.
government has not embraced this piece of legislation? Or?
We have a Liberal Party in government, and I actually I visited an MLA, I wouldn't say his name, after the bill failed to be put through to law amendments, and he said to me, you know what, Ingrid, if this were our bill, it would have passed. It's really about the fact that it's an NDP bill. So there you go.
I'm going to...
But I want to say that I respect and admire Lenore Zan, who has kept this issue at the forefront and is the only person who has been championing this particular bill. So much kudos to Lenore Zan.
Okay. I'm just, before we end, I want to go back to Louise and Lucy. What do you want to see happen now?
Oh, I want to see somebody come in there, and this is already happening with Fred, Wilbur, and thank God Ingrid, to test our water to make sure that our water's clean, because there's town water in the north end, but not in the south end. I want to see what soil samples show us that's been dumped there. I want to know what is causing, or like Ingrid said, you can't prove that cancer is caused by certain things, but I want to know what we've been exposed to when it comes to what's been dumped there.
We are talking really about one community, and we just touched on another, but Ingrid, you've made the point, and we saw on your map, this is an issue across the province.
And across the country.
Thank you, all of you, for bringing it forward to us. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
That is Louise DeLille. I'll say that again so you can hear me. You're applauding so much. That is Louise DeLille, Lucy Nickerson. They are lifelong residents of the south end of Shelburne. And Ingrid Waldron is a sociologist and a professor at Dalhousie University. And as you heard, that's where she's doing her research on environmental racism. Thank you very much, all of you. I just want to remind you, if you are tweeting about this public forum, to use the hashtag CBCFacingRace. You can see pictures of our guests today and the site of the dump that we have been talking about at cbc.ca/thecurrent. On our website, you can also see photos of this public forum. Coming up, we're going to hear how development in Halifax's historically black neighborhoods has longtime residents feeling shut out of their own communities. We are here at the Central Library in Halifax, and in our last half hour, we will be taking questions from our audience, and we will also have a special performance for you in our last half hour. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti, and you are listening to Facing Race, a special edition of The Current on CBC Radio 1. Okay, so when we're doing the show, this is I have a 5-minute bathroom break right now. Or I can run to my office where I have a secret coffee pot, don't tell anyone. And I get another, I make a pot of coffee in the morning and I drink the whole thing. Because I actually normally work with a studio director who doesn't caffeinate. I don't quite understand that. Our director is walking around right here now. That is Passant Matar. Anyway, so we're just going to get ready to start again. And I'll just take my cues from Passant. We're just miking up our guests. Get everybody ready. This is also the time, that 5-minute little break, when if I screw up, like I talk too much and it goes to the top of the clock, the computer at the CBC will cut you out. It doesn't matter if you have half a word left to say, it just cuts you. I'm Anna Tremonti, and this, and then you're gone. And so we use that 5 minutes to fix that. It happens once in a while. That clock waits for no man or woman. So we fix little things. Where it gets tricky is that if we have sometimes I do an interview and I put it on tape. And so we're actually running tape, for half an hour. Like on Wednesday, I'll be in the studio, but this will all be on tape. So sometimes we have something on tape, but sometimes we don't. And when we're doing the last half hour to Atlantic Canada, the first half hour to Ontario starts to run. And sometimes we're on a breaking story that has to keep changing, but I'm busy doing live, so I'm getting talked to in my ear here. So we do a lot of fancy footwork to get it all going. But anyway, I'm sorry, Passant, you need to repeat that. I'm just back there. We need to fix my microphone, excuse me.
Or wash my water there.
Okay, true confessions, I just did a makeup touch-up. I left CBC television and realized I would not die of hairspray lung. But tonight I got makeup, so. I think we're almost ready to go here. Thank you. We're just going to, I'll just wait for my cues. And we'll hear some more tape in this part. Hello, I'm Anna Maria Tremonti in Halifax, and this is a special edition of The Current, Facing Race. This is the first of our series of public forums on important issues of race in Canada. Today we're hearing directly from Nova Scotia's Black community about the lasting legacy of anti-Black racism in the province. If you're tweeting about this event, please use the hashtag CBC Facing Race. Still to come, we will be hearing from our audience here at the Halifax Central Library and from some watching on Facebook Live. But first, we are exploring racial tensions as neighborhoods gentrify and some feel left behind.
Yeah. You should do some finger twisting. Your curls could be popping. Is that right?
My name is Katoria, and I'm 24 years old.
My name is Dantea, and I'm 22 years old.
My name is Josh, and I'm 20 years old.
My name is Tiana, and I'm 17 years old.
So we're in the north end of Halifax, Nova Scotia.
I love that I grew up there, and that Black people, you see a lot of Black people.
I love that Uniacke Square feels like a home. Like, everybody just knows everybody. Like, my neighbor, I probably called her auntie because I just grew up and she was my mom's friend, and just I could go next door to her house, and it's just one big family.
Over the last few years, we've just seen the rapid change that has been happening. You know, condos going up everywhere. Obviously, we can't afford that. And then, yeah, like I said, the businesses and
They don't have any black employees in their working environment at all. And the businesses on Waterton Street.
And also, sometimes when you go into the businesses that are just down the street, like they'll look at you sideways, and it's just like kind of weird.
I just get the sense that it's not for me. You see the price, you see the atmosphere, you see no black people. I don't get the vibe that I'm necessarily welcome there.
It's sad to say, but I'm used to the feeling. Like, I'm used to feeling like I'm not belonging there.
It's just not a feeling that you should feel it while in your own community. I think that's the biggest issue.
Hi, Phil. How are you? So we're now at the corner of Charles and Crane Street. We came here 3 years back to paint this painting here. It's a painting of a black girl with blue braids.
We basically spend our whole day out here creating this together as a community, working together. It's a bunch of kids running around, paint splashing, yelling, running.
It's cool because it's like we're taking control of our own environment, and you know, it's us that put this here. We're letting people know that we're here, and we're not going anywhere.
I really want to go. We're freezing.
Well, there you go, a group of young people from the north end of Halifax, and they're with us tonight. Where are you? They're part of North Community Action Committee, and like them, my next guests are concerned about the changes they are seeing. Melinda Day is a former chair of the Halifax Regional School Board. Irvin Carvery is the president of the Africville Genealogy Society. Rodney Small grew up in the North End. He is now a business development manager at Common Good Solutions. Hello to all of you. Welcome.
Hello, Anna Maria.
Melinda Day, how long have you lived in the North End?
I'm a lifelong resident of the North End. Grew up on the streets of Creighton Street. Mm-hmm.
And how have you seen your community change?
Oh, gosh. Well, some of the things that the young people were saying there, that sense of community and that sense of I could go anywhere in the community and be a part of the community, go in and out of each other's homes. You know, growing up on the streets of Creighton Street, that's who we were. Creighton Street was a community. Creighton Street is another one of those communities. You know, when folks came from anywhere across the province and they needed to come to Halifax, they ended up on Creighton Street. And I grew up in a place called the Brick House. And for those of us that know Creighton Street and know that history of the Brick House, then we know that sense of community. Then we know that sense of each one looking after each one. We know that we looked out for one another. We knew what was going on in the wider community, of course, but we also knew that we were there with and for one another. And was that sense of, you know, no matter where I went, Mom and Daddy knew I couldn't get off with too much. For one thing, what's your last name? You know, Day. And, oh, you look exactly like Buddy Day. You know, things like that would come out. So I wasn't able to do too much. But I really enjoyed my years of growing up on Creighton Street, and then we moved over to Maynard Street. I look at the community over the years, and I say this because there was a wonderful sense of a vibrant community. Even though we may be poor, did we really know we were poor? Yeah, there were times when we did. I knew that. There were times, but there was that sense that I wasn't any worse off than the next one, so we were doing with and for one another. But now I looked over the community and I wondered, you know, the way they sometimes wanted to paint our community and paint our picture was that there was drugs and there was violence and nobody wanted to come to Creighton Street and nobody wanted to come to Gaudicon Street. Okay? You didn't want to come there. You didn't want to say that you lived on Creighton Street, so you changed the name to what, Northwood Terrace?
Northwood Terrace.
Yeah. That didn't just happen. I did not want to say I lived on Creighton Street, so the name was changed to Northwood Terrace. And a part of Gaudicon Street was changed. The name change came. So we knew that things were happening in that community, that there was their sense, us and them, their sense that this wasn't a place where I wanted to be associated with. You know, there's drugs down there, and there's violence down there. I don't know what they're going to do next down there, so you don't go down there. But that's not what we knew. That's not a sense of who we were. And now what I'm saying, you ask me, so what happens? Now you see this change, this shift. I want to live on Creighton Street. I want to live on Maynard Street. I want to live there so much so that I may have to move you out. And there's that feeling of I'm being pushed out. And I think that's what those young people are saying. Is, am I being pushed out here? Mm-hmm. Am I being made to feel that I'm unwelcome in my own home, in my own community? And that's that sense that now the homes that were once boarded up for many years, I live in this community, Roddy. We live here. Homes that were boarded up for years have now been renovated and remodeled, but not for you to live in. And I can remember so many years and years ago that Daddy said, why can't we live in these homes? Why can't we live in a home? Who are you to tell me that I can't live in a home, that I have to live in housing? I can live in a home. When I grew up on Creighton Street, they were homes. We lived in homes. Yes, of course, later came Mulgrave Park and Uniacke Square, but I grew up in a home, in the brick house and other homes. I grew up where the Simonses were. I grew up with the farmers. I grew up with the Downeys. I grew up with the Drummonds. I grew up with Mrs. Chandler. I grew up with these people living in homes. So I know what it is to have a home, and I know what it is to have a backyard. So I look today and I see something different, a shift happening here, and it's a concerning shift.
I want to pick up on that. Rodney Small, how have you experienced the changes that Melinda's talking about?
Firsthand, to put it plainly. I mean, growing up in the community, just like Melinda's saying, there's been a huge shift. I remember times where there used to be business in the community that actually were, the target audience was the people in the community, not just businesses. We're talking about grocery stores, so that access to the food. Then we're talking about banks, right? So these institutions were there for the community. Then we start to see our school close down, which is the St. Pat's location, right? So there's a whole lot that's going on in the community right before our eyes. And the transformation is for real.
How welcome do you feel in the North End community you grew up in?
Funny enough, I feel pretty welcome because I'm a pretty adaptable person. But at the same time, I don't frequent those businesses because I don't feel welcome. I don't spend my money where I don't feel welcome. I understand my buyer power. So there's no way I'm going to go into a business that I don't feel welcomed in, that's for sure, and spend my money. I spend my money where it's appreciated. And in the same token, there's other places that I'll be able to go and feel appreciated. So at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Do I feel appreciated? And is my dollar going to actually get the bang for its buck? And when I say get the bang for its buck, let's think about the social responsibility that we have to put on those business owners that are operating in those businesses, right? We're talking about unemployment. It's for real. It's for real. These are statistics that we know that are disproportionate in the black community.
So the black community is not getting the jobs of the new places?
Well, jobs are one thing, but at the same time, I work with some awesome clients at Common Good Solutions. I want to take the moment to really shout one out. And when I say shout them out, we have to be able to change the narrative. My buddy's running a podcast. It's called Change the Narrative. Look it up. Check it out. They're having some real authentic conversations on there. But in saying so, we have to be able to change the narrative from not only employment, but black ownership, right? Black ownership.
And bring Irvin Carvery into this. Do you relate to what Rodney's saying?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I remember a time in our community, Goddington Street, was the shopping area for all of Halifax. People came to Goddington Street to shop. And I hate to admit it, but I'm old enough to remember when we had nobody in those shops working, when we weren't allowed in some of the restaurants because of discrimination. I remember those times. Then there was a decline in the economics of Goddington Street with the development of shopping centers, and all those businesses moved away. And Goddington Street remained depressed for a long, long time. Melinda's father, Buddy, myself, and another gentleman put together a proposal to take to City Council in regards to the redevelopment of Goddington Street. We wanted to redevelop Goddington Street and make it a multicultural area for businesses to come and do business. And the response we received at the time was that, well, we need to develop Spring Garden Road first, and then we need to do Barrington Street, and then we'll consider Goddington Street. So yeah, I can relate to what Rodney's saying, and I'm an absolute believer in jobs are nice, but we need to own our own business. We need to hire our own people. Until we have economic independence, as blacks living in Canada for 400 years, we're always going to be challenged by what the larger society feels that we are deserving of.
Rodney, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yes, no, I want some play. I got to be real here because now we're talking about, we're getting into the roots of the conversation. And when I say, when we think of small business, right, this is, come on, this is the backbone of our economy, right? So when we think about small business being the backbone of our economy, right, and we go anywhere across this country where there's a significant culture or a group of one culture, whether it's Italians, Jamaicans, you name it. And you go in that community where there's, you know, they're predominantly that one culture. Guess what that business district will reflect? The population it serves.
Right.
We need to learn to actually create businesses that represent the population it serves. In our associations, so our associations that are established in these areas need to recognize and know the roles and advocating to make sure that the statistics are appropriate because they have the numbers. It's within their membership. So if you know there's not a significant representation of black business in your district, then you should advocate for that and start empowering people to want to own and not just employ.
Irvin, why do you think the existing community hasn't been able to become part of the growth and transformation that's happening there?
Well, it's a historical problem that we're up against. Historically, the marginalization of the black population in Nova Scotia and Halifax did not adequately prepare us to take advantage of the economic opportunities, the home ownership opportunities that became available. When I talk about I can remember a time, well, I can remember a time when my wife and I married and we were looking to purchase a home. And we looked in other areas of Halifax. We looked in the West End on Duncan Street and Dublin Street. And at that time, homes in that area were being sold for around $50,000 to $70,000. But we made a conscious decision. We wanted to stay in our community. So I was able to purchase a home on Maynard Street for $20,000. Now today, the purchasing cost of a home in Dublin and Duncan is exactly the same as the purchasing cost on Maynard and Creighton. So we've seen a shift in terms of property values. I lived in Uniac Square. I lived in public housing. I was able to leave public housing and gradually work my way up, first in a rental, then to home ownership because of the cost of the properties in the area. Today, currently, people living in public housing cannot look to leave public housing because the rents in the area are way beyond their means, and home ownership is a dream. So there's been this dramatic shift.
And we should point out, at part of your own personal history, you were in Africville.
Absolutely.
How old were you when you?
I was 13 when I left Africville, and I can relate to everything that Louise talked about down in Shelburne.
Right.
Because Africville, when you look up the word environmental racism, you look up that term, they have a picture of Africville. Not only did we have an open dump, we had an infectious disease hospital, we had a fertilizer plant, we had a quarry, we had abattoirs surrounding our community. So I came from a community of homeowners. I come from a culture of people who were homeowners, landowners. So it was only natural for me in the city to want to own my own home. And fortunately, Melinda talks about Creighton Street, and that's where my wife's family lived on Creighton Street to Itaroos, skier family from Nova Scotia, but the Itaroos. And what my wife and I have done is we have our own home, but we also secured her parents' property to ensure that that property stays in the family, as opposed to selling it off and making a quick dollar, which we could have. But we said, no, it's more important for us, for our children, our grandchildren, to hold on to that property so that they have an opportunity to live in the community that their family grew up in.
Melinda, with your experience in the education system, how have you seen this play out?
I'll give you some examples then. I went to school, of course, when I was a young girl in Joseph House School. And lo and behold, I became the principal of Joseph House School, which is an elementary school in the north end of Halifax, right? At that time, it was in the 70s and 80s and even early 90s. This part of Halifax was called inner city Halifax. Now we don't use the term, but there was inner city. We had an inner city education advisory committee. So many people that are in this audience today were part of the inner city education advisory committee. So anyhow, what happens in education and in the community is that you have a group of people that will move into the community but don't really want to be a part of the community. They have their reasons why they move here. And they don't want their children to attend the school which predominantly black children attend. Community kids attend. So what would happen is, you move into the community, you come to the school, you automatically ask for a transfer.
Out of school.
To another school. Right. You automatically, and you can receive those transfers.
How would you react as the principal when that happened?
Well, that's not something that I was readily wanting to do. And for one thing, the way the system is made up is that, the more students that you have in your school, the more resources that you can get in your school, And I need that as much as any other school in the West End or the South End. So I'm trying to build my school. I had a school with the first dress code, not only in Nova Scotia, in Canada. We had our first school dress code. The school was going for it. We had high academics, and we were making some great changes within the school. But still, folks did not want to come. They would ask for out-of-area transfers. What happened was, I would say, well, let me take you and tour you around my school so you could see just what the school does offer and what these children are learning. The person didn't like that, reported me to the school board at the time and said, I received a phone call telling me that if anyone comes to you and requests a transfer, you are to automatically give it to them. I said, no questions asked, no questions asked. If they want a transfer out, let them have their transfer. They don't have to explain to you. That's an indication, yes, something that I don't say often, very often, in terms of what are some of the things that have happened within our community. We're a very strong community. We're united. We keep ourselves strong. We face a lot of adversity, a lot of challenges. We face the racism, but we try our best to keep the community, the sense of community within the north end of Halifax. We want to own homes. We did own homes. We still own homes. Mm-hmm. We don't put for sale signs up. How many, later you can answer this question. If somebody were to come to your door and just say, you know, knock, knock, I want to buy your house. Well, I don't have any for sale sign up here. Yeah, but I'm willing to offer you X amount of dollars because my daughter lives over here on this street and I'd like to get this house for her. This happened in 2011. That somebody could just come to my door and knock on your door and tell you that I want your house. This has happened not only just to Melinda Day, but I venture to say it's happened to others as well. So there is that sense of what's happening here.
And spell it out for me. Are you talking about white families doing
white
this?
White families are coming in.
White
families are asking us, you know, how much do you want for this house? I'll give you this right now for this house.
Because you're sitting on property that
is
is now
on
valuable.
That type of property.
Times have changed, Anna Maria. There was a time, as described by Melinda, when our area was not desirable. It was considered the ghetto. But the area itself is within walking distance of the hospitals, recreation, entertainment, grocery stores, walking distance. You do not need a car to access all of the services you require if you live in our community. And people recognize the value in that. And that's when they began to come in and purchase the properties because they seen the value in it. But what has changed dramatically is when the community was a predominantly all black community, people sat on their stoops. People congregated on their front porches. Yes. They communicated with their neighbors. It was a community. But what I find strikingly, surprisingly, is that the new folks coming in, they come home from work and put their car there, they go in their door. And that's it. That's it. Or the condos that are being built in our community. Those condo dwellers, they're not a part of our community. They have underground parking. We don't see them. We only see them when they're clogging up the traffic in the community. But that's it. They add no value to the community.
You're talking about the gentrification, quote unquote, of a community
Right,
that it's not people who want to be part of your community because of the sort of the electric air of a long time association with neighbors. They don't want anything to do with your community.
Not really.
No, I'm not really saying that.
Not really.
They bring their own culture. Mm-hmm. They bring their own way of life, and their way of life from where they came from.
And what happens to yours?
Ours, well, you know what? We say God bless you. But we will sit out on our stoops and we will still continue to gather and express our culture the way we always have. And the first folks into our community, and I have to speak this, the first people to move into our community was the gay community. The gay community came into our community. You know why? Because we are welcoming. We were welcoming.
The North End is welcoming.
And they came and purchased and fixed up homes and did a lot of things because a lot of places in Halifax, they were not welcomed. They didn't feel welcomed, but they felt welcomed in our community. Because of course, given our history of being discriminated against and being marginalized, we empathize with their position.
Rodney is nodding in agreement. I want you to weigh in.
I'm loving what I'm hearing. I mean, I get to sit back and listen to two of the people that I grew up with in the community. I slept in Lynn's house for many nights. Irving coached me. So, you know, at the end of the day, this is a real conversation, and I get to hear this is a lot of knowledge. And traditionally, this is how we pass knowledge down in our community, you know, through our grandparents listening, paying close attention. By the way, even when we're broke, so if we got no money, we can still pay attention. Right? These are things that we have to understand. My grandfather told me that from day one. Right. And I do pay attention. And with that being said, you know, this is a really enriching conversation, and one that not only myself, but other gentlemen in the community, Lindell being one, and Steve and Nelson, who are concerned community members, had the opportunity to speak about in a CBC article that was released 2 years ago, labeled The Two North Ends. Well, we spoke slightly about it, and you're not going to like what I'm about to say, right? But at the end of the day, the media becomes a part of the problem, right? Because they push out the mass message. So with that being said, we decided to take hold of that conversation because they help create those stereotypes that these ones were mentioning. My elders, by the way, mentioning those stereotypes on our community. I grew up in this community. In fact, I quit school because I felt more valued in my community, which was supposed to be infested with drugs, violence, and everything else. But that's where I found my love, okay? I never felt that love in that school system. I mean, ironically, isn't that where I should be feeling that love and support? Not in the ghetto where there's drugs and violence, but that's where I found my love. And with that being said, that's that sense of community that's ingrained in all of us, which is the reason why we call it my community. If you hear any of us that speak to the community, we usually say my community for a reason.
I want to bring in someone else to whom you have been welcoming. We have one of the newer business owners in Halifax with us in our audience. Dida Kazdan is the owner of Dee Dee's Ice Cream Shop, which opened its doors in 2010. Hello.
Hello.
What drew you to the North End as a place to open your business?
Well, for a number of reasons. I had actually lived in the North End for a couple of years. I was drawn to the diversity of the North End. And it's also absolutely true that I was beginning a business with no access to capital. And it was a reasonable place to open a business. But aside from that, I never saw myself as a Spring Garden Road type person.
How aware are you of the dynamics and tensions that we've been hearing about?
I'm very aware of them. I can't say I've always been very aware of them, but I've been a part of a number of community meetings related to this issue. I've sat in rooms and listened to many voices.
And when you went to hire, who did you hire to work in your store?
Well, when I first opened, I actually did not have the hiring practices that I do now. I have to be perfectly upfront about that. Now I have I try to hire and successfully, I would say, hire local youth. I'm quite seasonal, but so last summer I think I had 6 youth working for me.
From the community?
From the community, yeah.
And how did that change things for you?
Oh, well, they're wonderful people. It's absolutely true that, first of all, my clientele has changed. I definitely feel more a part of the community. I now know their parents. Some of those youth I've been working with for probably 3 years now, so you begin to know them, you begin to know their families, you get to know their aspirations, what they wish for in their lives, not necessarily just working for me for the rest of their lives. Yeah, so very much I feel more a part of the community.
By making those jobs available to young people from that
Absolutely,
community.
yeah.
To what extent do other business owners who are relatively new to that area, make an effort to hire from within the community?
Well, it's difficult for me to speak for other business owners. I can say that there are a number of initiatives that are being taken every day. In fact, I just heard of a new one, a group of people partly coming from the community, approaching the business association. There's a lot of interest in it. I think that there's a lot of challenges. It's at the beginning, we're at the beginning, and at the same time we realize that something really serious needs to happen really soon.
Okay, well, Dita, thank you. Thank you.
you.
Rodney, do you want to speak to that, the importance of jobs in some of those businesses then?
I think it's extremely important that, the businesses in the community start to engage the youth in the community. I think this is a great way to start building those bridges. We have to build the bridges. We have to start the conversation somewheres. And, I think they can be some great mentors to these young people in the community and actually encourage and empower them to want to own someday. I think that's extremely important. I think it's a very important part of the conversation. Some of those conversations that Dee Dee is actually talking about, and some of that information that both Melinda and Irvin identified, call it what it is, white ignorance, because that's what the conversation was hosted and that's what it was known as. So let's call it what it is, because when you have people that actually are willing to come in the community with such a strong history and not willing to indulge in that history and learn about that community, it is what it is, ignorant, plain and simple.
And she makes the point that when you hire somebody, you end up getting to know them and the conversation changes. You end up having a conversation with the whole family, with the neighborhood.
Changing the narrative once again.
I think it should be recognized too that in our community, we have a long-standing Lebanese community in our community who have been there for years and years and years. And not only do they run their business, but they live in the community. And they've raised their families, and now we have third generation of that same Lebanese families in our community. So it's always been a very diverse community.
So as we talk about this, what do we need to think about in terms of how the community can retain a real sense of ownership in the north end of Halifax as things move forward?
So one of the things I was saying, just to bring it back full circle about that 2 North Ends article, well, me and 2 other guys were featured in that whole article, and we decided to grab control of that conversation and label it the 1 North End. And we literally call the conversation the 1, and we've been really engaging with our youth over the last 2 years, and we're having these enriched, genuine conversations to really carry them out into the community, to create the awareness for them so that they know there's a transformation going on before your eyes, and you need to understand and be involved in the conversation and see yourself in that conversation. By the way, one of the individuals involved in that conversation didn't start as the counselor, but he's the counselor today. And by the way, furthermore, he came from a position at the North Branch Library in which his role was to basically empower that youth voice. So to start the conversation from one of the most vulnerable voices in our community and to be willing to carry that out, take a look, find us on Facebook, The One. In fact, conversations going on today, it's for real, in the community as we speak. And we've already had our conversation with the youth, now we're engaging their parents. It's important we do it in the right way, and we have the expertise of over, let me see, I ain't gonna tell you how old I am, but over 100 years combined.
Well, I am very grateful that you were willing to have some of this conversation with us as well. Thank you, all 3 of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That is Irvin Carvery, president of the Africville Genealogy Society. Rodney Small grew up in the North End. He's now a business development manager at Common Good Solutions. Melinda Day is a former chair of the Halifax Regional School Board, all speaking to me here at the Halifax Central Library. Coming up next, here at the Central Library, we will be hearing your experiences and questions in person and online through Facebook Live. We also have a special performance in store for you. A reminder, if you're tweeting about this public forum, to use the hashtag CBCFacingRace. For more on the stories you are hearing today, go to our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent. You will also find more information about upcoming forums in Vancouver and Montreal. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti in Halifax, and this is Facing Race, a special edition of The Current on CBC Radio 1. Oh, I'll go back.
So everybody joins you on stage.
Yeah, perfect.
It's going to be your conversation.
Okay.
So I need to train everyone on how to turn the mics on. It's very simple. So they're gonna unmic you. These are gonna be roving mics. So Elle Jones will have her own mic, but everybody else, because she's having a water. When you're talking, it lights up when it's on. Off. On. Yeah. Yes. Hold the back. Yeah. Hold the back.
Okay, we're going to be coming back in a few minutes for the last half hour. So we'll have a few shorter interviews, and then we're going to open it up to you. I'll tell you this while we're rolling tape, but we're going to have two people with mics, the two Marys, Mary Link and Mary Catherine McIntosh. And we are going to want to hear from many people, so if you could be as succinct as possible, but I know that a lot of you want to be part of this conversation. I can hear you agreeing with some of the stuff you've heard. So anyway, we'll come to that soon. This part, I only ever get 90 seconds in between, so I don't go anywhere in between when we get going with the current. Sometimes it's a little frantic. So we'll start again in just a second. And you'll want to stay till the end because we have something very special from Elle Jones at the very end of our show. Yes, thank you. How long? You want 45? You want 45-ish? Oh, okay. Why don't you put it up here? Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Should start by
Like I said, right at the end of the show, I'm going to be right.
Okay, you're just going to drag me there, right?
I'll let you know when to come.
Okay.
I won't drag you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, now you can really hear me.
I read it on paper, and I can't wait to hear you perform it, because on paper it's just spectacular.
It's a little longer than I said, so sorry about that. I thought it was 2. It's closer to 3, so sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. I timed it today, and I was like, oops.
just be a couple more minutes. I'm really glad you could make tonight.
Glad to be.
It's good.
How long do you stay here?
Pardon?
When do you leave? Just tomorrow morning?
Actually, I've got friends who are going to take me to their place. I'm going to stay till Sunday.
Oh, nice.
We came in on Monday so we could spend time in
Oh, so
Shelburne.
you
I
gotta-
didn't want to get like I was afraid I'd get snowed out or something, but the weather's been really good.
So have you been broadcasting from here?
No, we've just been getting ready for this show. Yep, yeah.
You
I'm
need
good.
to get like the traveling broadcast.
Yeah. Well, it's
In a van.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to live in Halifax, but a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I've always had a special place in my heart. But I'm glad we're talking about this.
Take the weekend. Yeah.
Okay, Yamri. Yamri. Okay, we're going to start again. We'll be starting again. Okay, we're starting again. If you can take your seats, please. Thank you. Okay. This is my little timer. It's not giving it to me. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Any time, Passat? I'm Anna Maria Tremonti in Halifax at the Central Library, and this is Facing Race, a special edition of The Current on CBC Radio 1. This is the first in a series of public forums we are recording in 3 cities to explore important issues of race in this country. Today we've been talking about the legacy of anti-Black racism in Nova Scotia. And a reminder, if you're tweeting about our program, use the hashtag CBCFacingRace. You can head to our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent, to learn more about our guests and the issues we are talking about. And to see more about this series, we have town halls coming up in Vancouver with Pia Chattopadhyay and with Duncan McHugh in Montreal. In this half hour, we want to hear from our audience. Here at the Central Library in Halifax, we want to hear what you think of the discussion today. If you'd like to say something, please look for our CBC colleagues, Mary and Mary Catherine. They have the microphones, and they'll be in the audience in just a moment with those microphones. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please post your questions in the comments. But first, I have another guest joining me on stage. Elle Jones is the former Poet Laureate of Halifax. She is also an activist and a Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies at Mount St. Vincent University. She has spoken out and written extensively on violence against Black women and girls. Hello, Elle.
Good evening.
What are the stories you are hearing about violence against women and girls in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, so right now there's an international conversation really going on with Me Too. But often only some women are making that conversation. So I work a lot with criminalized women and girls, so women and girls that have contact with the law or are criminalized in other ways, like through the care system, in their schools. And their stories really aren't being heard at all. So some of the stuff you'll hear from very young girls, for example, I've had girls tell me, particularly girls that have been in the care system, that they were sexually assaulted at age 12 or 13. And it says in their files that they were street workers and prostitutes.
and so their rapes weren't taken seriously. One girl told me that in her file it said, well, her body is very curvy, like an adult. And this was used to deny her report of being sexually assaulted. Young girls in schools have told me about their mental health not being considered. One girl told me, she came to me and she said, my teacher told me I'm a bully. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, you know, I got upset at school and I get angry. And the teacher told me I'm a bully, and they basically told me I can't be in the class. And this was a young girl that was suffering abuse in her home. So rather than asking this young girl what was happening in her life, she was being labeled as violent and essentially criminalized and then pushed out of the school. So you hear these stories over and over again. A lot of the issues that we've been talking about on this panel, education, housing, these are things that particularly affect the bodies and the lives of Black women who are living in poverty and then don't have any resources and are suffering from trauma either in their homes or the communities and particularly from the state. So when we're talking about Me Too, we're not talking about the state violence that women are experiencing in prisons, where we see Black women being the highest growing rate of women being put into prison. And we know that women who are criminalized are victims of trauma, and they're not being part of this conversation. So it's not only that some women are being left out, we're also only talking about some kinds of violence and some kinds of power. But what we're not talking about is how, from the beginning of Black women's existence in this country, Black women's bodies have been raped, Black women's bodies have been exploited, Black women's bodies have been state property in particular ways, and that is still going on. And you're still seeing that today in the lives of women and girls.
You have a radio show where you talk to female inmates in Nova Scotia. Tell me a little bit more, you've touched on it, but tell me a little bit more about what they tell you about their experience.
So we talk to both women and men, but what the women will talk about is lack of mental health care. Lack of feminine hygiene products. So I don't know if you can imagine what it's like to be in jail and to have to bleed through your underwear because you don't have access to a tampon or a pad.
In Canada?
In Canada, yes. The solitary confinement issues. So even though that's been declared unconstitutional, women will talk about being in seg. Women who are being segged while they're pregnant. Women who aren't being able to see their children. So you have all kinds of violence that women are experiencing. And what's really beautiful about women is that they will speak for other women at great risk of themselves. So often they'll call in and they'll say, there's another woman here, and this is happening to her. And so we know that Black women are entering the system more and more and more, that the rate is going up highest among Black women who are often in jail because of things like driving the car for a boyfriend who's abusive and who told them you drive the car or else. Women who are involved in the drug trade who are being coerced in their relationships, who are being beaten or raped and then told to carry drugs. And those stories aren't making the news. They're being criminalized and they're being told that they're the ones that are wrong and that they're the ones that are the problem. And in fact, what's been happening to them is trauma, and there's no understanding of that. When Jean Gameshi happened, and everybody said, rightly so, there's a problem in the justice system, women aren't getting justice. And I said, but wait a minute, you just thought that all those Indigenous and Black women just did it? All this time, you thought that we just committed those crimes? So we know that the justice system doesn't serve Black women and girls or Indigenous women and girls. And so what we're seeing is them being caught up more and more into these systems, having their children taken away from them because they have a record or because they're poor, and they're being accused of neglect. And then they're saying, you can't feed your child in the way we want you to, or we're not giving you housing, so now we're taking your child from you. And now that child is being violated, and now there's a cycle where all of these girls and women are being caught up in the system. So I really think that we need to speak out about this. It's something that's very difficult for women to speak about, and even more difficult for Black women, where particularly if we have to speak about men in our communities, that's difficult because our men also suffer from so much racism and so much incarceration, and we know that they suffer from violence, so then it's very difficult for Black women to also have a voice on this.
So if you need help and you're a Black woman, you're afraid that you're going to hurt your wider community, and you must be, if you're a mother and you ask for help, what happens?
Well, I mean, we are checked 3 times more than the police in Halifax. We know that our police in Halifax aren't serving the Black community. So if you're a Black woman, why do you think that you're going to be able to call the police when we know that police come in the homes of people suffering from mental illness and attack people? This is what has got people shot in Canada. Mentally ill people are shot. Mentally black people are killed. So a woman has to make a decision about, does she want to invite that into her house if she's suffering abuse? And yes, also, if we know that Black men are also going to be criminalized and seen unfairly, when our entire communities are called pimping communities or violent communities, and we know that this myth exists, that our communities are the most violent,
you don't necessarily want to contribute to that as a woman, knowing that it's not, in the end, you're not going to get help, and you're also, what's going to happen is just that narrative is going to make the news, and people are going to say, see, black men are what we said they are, they're thugs. So as long as we live in a racist society that criminalizes black people, that sees black men as violent criminals, and sees black women as unrapeable, and as a kind of human property, and as not having human bodies, this is what we see, that we have a violence that's being done to us by the state, and when that violence comes into our homes and communities, we don't really have the tools to fight it.
And we make the point, we're at this heightened conversation now about violence and sexual violence against women, but we're still not talking about this in a wider way.
No, so we tend to sort of, and all women are subject to abuse. There's not being white, being rich, as we know from seeing the Me Too conversation, you can be the most famous woman in the world and suffer from sexual violence. So I'm not discounting that. But what I'm saying is that can't be the only conversation. And we can't only talk about sexual violence as taking place one way. Because black women also experience sexual violence in all kinds of other ways. So they experience violence in their schools in particular ways. We experience violence in the way our children are taken from us, and the way our parenting is critiqued, the way that we're seen as bad mothers, which has a particular sexual history for black women, and the way that black bodies move through space. So when black hair products are locked up behind the counter at Shoppers because black women are thieves, that's putting a particular criminalization onto black women's bodies that marginalizes our bodies and that makes us more vulnerable in other ways to violence. The way we move around our workplaces, the way our hair is critiqued, and having natural hair makes you less professional. All these ways our bodies are judged, our skin is judged, our body is too curvy, it's too thick, like why is your breasts out, when you're trying to go to work and just wear a shirt and you're being critiqued. And what I'm saying is all these things are racialized violence as well, and we can't just talk about it as sexual violence, and we can't just talk about it as, okay, if your boss sexually harasses you, we have to say what happens. How does policing become sexual violence for women? How does going to school become sexual violence for black girls?
Because this starts, you make the point, this starts with girls just going to school, the way they are treated, about even how they dress.
Yeah, how they dress. They've talked about how they will express to teachers or to school officials that they're feeling anxiety or depression, and that's seen as attitude. So you're being bad rather than you're in need of help. Some of them have said that when they have these problems in school with racism, their homes get called and they go home and experience their parents being disappointed and angry with them, and they can't explain, this happened to me because of racism. So then they experience some marginalization in their own homes. They're not able to speak about their experiences in all these particular ways. So they're seen consistently as being bad, as being, you're acting out, rather than needing help or needing assistance or having something going on that needs a conversation. And so this, again, is the way that black women's bodies tend to be criminalized and seen as a problem, rather than seen as people who are human beings.
What kind of reactions do you get when you talk about these things?
Well, I mean, I experienced racialized sexualized violence as well. I was drawn as a monkey, in a cartoon which has a particular history for black people, obviously a history of calling us savage, a history of calling us primitive. I spoke out when I talked about Sidney Crosby going to the White House and suggested that maybe he could take a stand. I received all kinds of messages like N-word written 12 times, death threats, suck on this part of my body, or a C word. And this was constant. And it's not something that we're supposed to complain about. If we complain about it, we're just being sensitive. And if you do complain about it, there's nothing anybody can do. So a point I always make is if I play my music after 10 in my apartment, my neighbors can call the cops on me. But if a white man wants to send me a message telling me to suck his whatever, and I call the police, if it's not persistent and he didn't, put my address there and make a direct death threat, well, then he can. That's his free speech, right? And in fact, the problem is me trying to stop him from having that free speech, not him sending me these messages. So there's all these ways that power is balanced. I'm being mouthy, I'm a bee, I'm all these things, and that makes me, because I speak out, therefore I'm asking for it. So you get the same kind of narrative you get around sexual violence being applied to black women who are outspoken, that you deserve it, you shouldn't be out there talking about race, you're just pulling the race card, so if white people want to attack you, well, that's your own fault. So when you try to speak about these things, you get a huge amount of violence directed towards you, and if you complain about that violence, you just get more violence.
I was going to ask you what has to change, but I think the answer would be everything. But how do you move forward? How does, not you, but the wider society, how does our wider society move forward so that you don't have to point out these things?
Well, I think we're building and resisting all the time. I think about Harriet Tubman, who, made multiple trips into the South to save children, brought them up to Canada to save Black people, and created a laundry so she could work the months of the year she wasn't in the States so that she could come and save Black people. We have a long history of resistance. Viola Desmond in this community in Nova Scotia. I could list so many more women. Black women have had long histories of holding down our communities on no resources, on the little that we have, and sharing it with everybody else. So we know what to do. We are a resilient people. We are a resistant people. And we have consistently built communities that are spaces of love, that are spaces of survival, and that where we thrive in. So it's not that we don't know what to do. It's just that we're not usually being allowed to do those things to our fullest extent and our fullest humanity. So we have the solutions. The solutions are to give us the dignity that we have, to allow Black women to live our lives in the way that we know how to live our lives, and to allow us to love each other, to allow us to care for each other, hold each other accountable in our communities, to allow us to do the work of raising our families, and to stop being so cruel to us all the time and interfering with us. And if people would stop doing that, we already have the solutions. So I know I'm not alone in this. I can look around this audience and see the faces of so many women in this room. And I'm looking at Tina, I'm looking at Bernadette. I could shout out names. So I started shouting out names, and I'm going to feel bad that I didn't. But Shelley, so many women here that are doing this work every day and the work of building love in our communities. So as much as we speak about this violence, we know that women are already out there working for our girls, working for men in our communities. Barb, you're here too. And we just have to continue focusing on that, because the love that we have, the resilience that we have, can never go away, and it can't be taken from us.
Al, thank you for your voice. Al Jones is a former poet laureate of Halifax. She's also an activist and a Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies at Mount St. Vincent University. Stay with us. You will hear Al performing her own poem on this issue at the end of our program. Now we're going to our audience and through Facebook Live, and we want to hear your thoughts and experiences with what we've been talking about today with racism in your community. Our CBC colleagues are in the audience with their microphones. You can see them right there. They can come to you, and I ask you to be as succinct as possible so we can get many voices in, but we do want to hear from you. And just before we do that, I want to introduce someone else who is with us in our audience. Tony Ince is the Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs. Minister Ince, hello.
Hello.
You have been listening to all of this. What have you been thinking as you've been listening to the stories and the issues of our guests?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's really important for me to be here to hear this. As a member of the government, the Premier and my government are here to I'm here really to hear these voices, and it's not something that's new to me. I've grown up hearing all these stories all my life. Many of the people in the audience may know me because when I grew up, the north end of Halifax was from the police station all the way up to Novalee Drive. That was the north end to me. So all these stories are not new to me. I will say to you that the first thing, I'm quite emotional right now because these are stories, as I've repeatedly said, I hear often, and I've heard since I was a young person. I can relate to a number of the issues that people have raised. I left Nova Scotia in the 70s, and I didn't come back until 2004. So many people stayed here and stayed in the fight for years while I was somewhere else. I will tell you that part of these stories is what got me into government. It's what motivated me to step forward and move into the direction that I'm in. I said to many of my friends around the country when I lived in different parts of the country that it's time to be at the table as opposed to talking about the table.
Can I ask you, are you the first Minister of African Nova Scotia Affairs?
No, I'm not.
You're not. How long has the government had that portfolio? Do you know?
I think since about 2005. Yeah.
Okay. What solutions do you see then to the concerns you've heard here?
That's a tough question because I'm one individual. I am one individual. I am a voice that should be bringing what I'm hearing to the table. I will say to you that I am currently proud and very excited because while I have brought several issues to the table, they were heard and listened to by my colleagues around the table. Despite what some people may think, I have raised issues and there are some evidence that it is being listened to. I'll just point to one example, which is emotional to me because I have friends that were affected by this, and that's the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children. We have a premier who apologized for that. Not only did he apologize, he put into action something which would hopefully help us change that direction of systemic racism and discrimination in this province. A restorative inquiry which is unlike any other. I have many colleagues who often come to me and say to me, our agency boards and commissions aren't diverse enough. Tony, what can we do? So we do have a government that is listening. Many people would sit here and argue and say shame, but there are actions, there are things that a government is doing to listen. Well, there's a lot more work to be done, though.
I was just going to say, what do you need for those people who sit around that cabinet table with you to make faster decisions on those issues?
Well, you know what? They talk about taking action and do things. It's not as simple as everybody would like to make it be, because community needs to be more involved. There are several levels of government. When we talk about government, I'm provincial. I'm not federal, and I'm not municipal. I can speak to those colleagues, and as a matter of fact, I will tell you that when I went to my premier and I said, I need to speak to you because there's an idea that has come up. I've got nationally colleagues in Ontario who are talking about these same issues. I'd like to start something where we can sit down as a group to address the issues of African Canadians. He said, Tony, do it. So we are moving in that direction. Yes, maybe it should be, but it's 200 years. I've only been elected since 2013.
Okay, well, we'll come back and check with you another year, but thank you for speaking with us. Thank you. Tony Ince, Minister of African and Nova Scotian Affairs, with us at the Halifax Library on this special edition of The Current. We're going to open this up to our audience now. I can go with, who shall I go with first there? Mary, if you want. Okay.
Hi, Mary. I'll try to be brief. There's an instrument that social scientists use called social proximity studies. They survey ethnic groups regarding their attitudes towards other ethnic groups. So I'll ask them, who would you like your son or daughter to marry if they couldn't marry in your race? Who would you like as a boss if you couldn't have a boss of your race? Every group rates Black North Americans at the bottom. As far as I'm concerned, at a very granular level, this is about denying the humanity of black people. When you do that, it's very easy then to deny a black person a job, to rape a black woman, to shoot a black person in the back. I just wonder, Elle, if you could speak to that, please.
Yeah, so anti-black racism is incredibly ingrained, and that's why we use the phrase anti-black racism opposed to just racism, to recognize that there's a specific way that black bodies have been seen as specifically inhuman. So this exists across all groups. So sometimes people will say, well, I can't be racist because I'm a brown person, or I'm also a racialized person, without recognizing that anti-black racism, as it existed through slavery and colonialism, has this particular history. So you're absolutely right to identify that, and that's one reason why we specify this. So we see, for example, that people who immigrate to Canada, who can also be black people, but often pick up particular narratives around North American blacks. So in this own city, for example, you'll get people that have picked up the narrative that the local black people are just lazy. And so I came here and got a job, why can't you get a job? Because nobody teaches the history of, well, black people were actually enslaved in Nova Scotia. There was race riots in Nova Scotia where white people burned down black people's communities to prevent black people from having any resources, right? So if you don't know that history, that there's a 400-year history of oppression, you get other black people even that will come in and say, well, the community here, why can't they just pull their socks up? And you'll also see that in other groups. So part of this has been the burying of black history, the consistent stripping of black people of humanity, and the consistent stripping us of our resources and any ability to do for ourselves, and then turning that back on us, criminalizing us, saying that we're violent, creating these stereotypes which are just widely believed.
We have a question on Facebook here. Is the North End Business Association at all involved in trying to give a leg up to local people, or are they still just supporting gentrification? Who can speak to that? Rodney? Oh, wait a second. Take that microphone. Hold on.
I think that was a setup. I gotta be honest with you. That has to be a setup question. It come from Facebook?
It's on Facebook.
Oh! Patty, do you want to speak to it before I speak to it? I have to give Patty the mic because she's actually the director of the North End Business Association.
Okay, so why don't you...
Thank you, Rodney.
Hello. I'm sorry. Give us your name again, please.
My name is Patricia Cuddle, and I'm the director of the North End Business Association. And I just want to say thanks once again, Rodney, for keeping my eye on the ball. You never let me take it off, so I appreciate that and keep pushing me forward. We're actually doing a lot, and it's a complex issue because I want to talk about the housing and what's happening with the real estate market and opportunities and the things that I'm really concerned about and the changes that are happening in the North End. So, but to answer that Facebook question, we do have a community committee. It is part of our board structure. We do have a community representative on that board. I work closely with a lot of community organizations, and like many of the people here in the room, I know and I've worked with. So we are trying to find solutions. We're looking at building better relationships. We're looking at youth employment. We're looking at how, as a business community, we can have a bigger impact in the community and making sustainable changes, not just giving money like $50 here or $200 there, but how we can collectively work with the community to make a bigger impact. And also, I have the fortune of sitting at many of the tables, and so I'm always advocating for the North End. I see diversity as one of our strengths, and some of the things I'm really concerned about are diversity and inclusiveness and affordable housing. So, when I heard Melinda and Irvin talking about what they're seeing changing in the housing market, we don't really have a good affordable housing policy in Nova Scotia, not at the provincial level and not at the municipal level. And so and what's happening in Halifax is happening, we're seeing it happen across the country as real estate prices in cities, with kind of back to the city movement is happening, real estate prices are going up.
Rodney says you're getting off topic. I have to cut you off. Okay, I'm going to ask you to be brief, though, okay?
Yeah.
Very brief.
So we need to see that from the province. We need to see affordable housing. And as for us,
I'll leave it there for now, okay? Thank you.
That's great.
Rodney, yeah.
My turn.
I think he wants to guest host the show. Go ahead,
My
Rodney.
turn.
You do want to speak to this?
Well, at the end of the day, I wanted to give her space to speak, but I beg to differ. I beg to differ. I think as far as NEBA, like I said earlier, we're talking about changing the narrative, okay? So NEBA's the business association. How are you engaging the few black businesses in the community? How is that working for you? That's what we need to know. Then we need to know, how are you actually advocating to empower to change that narrative, right? Because if you have these committees, you got to get your priorities in line. That's extremely important. And as far as collaboration, we've been struggling with that, Patty. Let's be frank, right? We've been struggling with that. So we have to be able to have these conversations openly like we're having them here today, and then move forward on them, because the small talk, it don't fly with me.
Okay. Now, I'm going to keep moving with the audience. Hang on. No, I'm good. I have to keep moving, okay? If we, where did Mary Catherine go? There you are. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, how you doing? I just wanted to thank you, first of all, Anna Maria, for having the show. It's really important, it's topical, and these issues have been going on, as people have been saying, for centuries, but we haven't had a voice and we haven't had a chance to articulate the issues. So I just wanted to keep it really brief, but there's a couple things that I think we need to start to look at, and one is the institutions and the lack of accountability of the institutions. You look at the issues that everyone has raised, from environmental concerns. There's a whole area of health that we haven't talked about, and the inaccessibility of health, health inequality that hasn't been addressed, issues around education, issues around criminalization. I'll refrain from using the term justice, because justice is a different thing that we don't experience. When you're looking at aspects of political engagement and economic opportunity. So these issues are all funneled back to institutions, and the institutions are, as Minister Ince mentioned, running from municipal, federal, and provincial levels. But at the end of the day, they're still the institutions that are here to serve us. So what I'd like to see, and maybe Minister Ince, you could start this, is looking at setting targets, hard targets around these issues. Oftentimes, you'll see a lot of activity going on, and there'll be an initiative taken off, and we don't even know where this is going, what we're trying to focus on. But if you look at the rate of failure amongst black learners in Nova Scotia and Indigenous learners in Nova Scotia, those are real numbers. Right? If you look at the number of black bodies who are being incarcerated in Nova Scotia, Indigenous people that are being incarcerated in Nova Scotia, those are real numbers. And if you have a real number, then you can work up and down from that. And unfortunately, we have a lot of activity that doesn't necessarily reflect results. So I think, first of all, taking a look at the institutions, seeing where the numbers are, and then setting these very hard targets to start to put in strategies to start to address these things is one way that we can start to hold these institutions accountable. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of talk. But if we're not seeing a movement where it needs to be, that's
and I'm going to just point out, thank you. Thank you. Even in preparing this program today, the minister is here, but no one at any other level wanted to come on. Not municipal. We tried to get people. And accountability, it's up to the media as well to hold elected representatives. When we talk about the issues that you raised, it is up to us to hold our elected representatives accountable in your name as well. And it is becoming increasingly difficult in this country at every level. So thank you for raising that issue. Irvin, you wanted to say something briefly, because I want to give the audience.
Really quickly. We are in Nova Scotia, the historic home of Indigenous blacks in Canada. The title, Facing Race. We cannot be here without talking about Abdul Abdi. Yes. Abdul Abdi, a black man who was suffering from systemic racism. Minister Ince mentioned about the inquiry into the colored home. An inquiry which delved into the systemic racism that caused the problems that affected black children in that home. Abdul Abdi has been affected by that same systemic racism. We're in Nova Scotia. Abdul Abdi needs to stay home here in Nova Scotia.
We, in fact, have had his sister on our program to talk about just that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mary, go ahead. You have a guest.
There's been a lot of talk about the inner city. I grew up in a all-black segregated community, one of the oldest communities in the area. So to the panel, and I don't know who's going to answer what the question probably is, I'm talking about the rural-urban divide and the experience in those rural communities where predominantly black people reside. So it's not in your inner cities, it's in these rural areas. And the way that racism manifests itself and the way that we experience it may be different in some ways than the intercities. So can somebody speak to those and how they intersect?
I'm going to ask Ingrid Waldron, actually, because Ingrid, you have looked at this. This in Nova Scotia, this is actually the African Nova Scotians in rural areas is almost unique in Nova Scotia, is it not? Wait a second. We'll get
When you look at the rest of Canada, like Montreal or Toronto, others, black people tend to gravitate towards urban areas, right? Because they're looking for jobs. What's unique about Nova Scotia is that we have historic black communities that have been here for over 300 years that are in isolated communities, communities that some of them would refer to as off the map, consequently invisible in terms of getting attention from government. So when you look at some of these issues, particularly around racism, you've got to look at the intersections of race, class, income, and rurality, right? Because many of these communities are cut off from resources. Some of the resources that we take for granted, like hospitals and healthcare, poor transportation, infrequent transportation. So when we look at some of the issues of racism, it's about looking at how all those intersections shape access to resources, shape whether or not certain communities get attention. And for rural African Nova Scotian communities, you're dealing with communities that are racialized in particular ways, that are poor, suffering from income insecurity, are isolated, out of the way, under-resourced, and consequently forgotten and invisible when it comes to policymakers addressing some of their concerns.
I'm going to ask Melinda just to speak briefly to this as well. I know you want to say something. We have to keep this microphone, by the way, up here. We've got two people up there with microphones. Go ahead, Melinda.
It's a very good point. What you said, Ingrid, is that Nova Scotia is one of the most amazing provinces in Canada because our history is so unique in that we have the indigenous people, the black indigenous people of this country are here in Nova Scotia. Our black communities are here. And what this lady is talking about is real, is that these type of things are very real today as they were 300, 400 years ago. We were placed here and we were not supposed to make it. The system was designed so that you would not be here 300 years later. However, here we are today. We have communities such as Lucasville. They took the name Lucasville. They didn't want to say it was a black community. That community had to fight to get their name back. It's the community of Lucasville. It's the black community of Lucasville. Many people didn't like that. You heard an outcry against it. Many of the other white people, they said, no, I don't have any problem living here. But look at the problem they endured in having their community rightly named what it was always, Lucasville, a black community. Same thing for our community of Beachville.
We're going to have to go to
Yeah, I want to talk about what happened with our Beachville.
I've got a lot of questions here.
We got to be very careful about what's happening in our communities with our people. Stand strong.
Okay, right there.
Oh, hi, my name's Elena Coyote. I'm a racialized youth living in the North End, and I'd like to share my experience. So, living in the North End, my community is currently being gentrified, and I had to experience leaving my house and seeing all these white people who can't even say hi to me in a community that has been historically been black. And then this year, I can't even go to my English class without a 50-year-old white man throwing around the N-word in my face and having to read books that racially oppress against me. So I was wondering when the Eurocentric curriculum is going to stop.
You're right on. I know your pain.
It's real.
Go ahead, Melinda. You want to
Yeah.
say something?
Your pain is very real. There's no exaggeration here. She speaks for herself, and she speaks for so many others. I'm still in the system. I'm a retired teacher and a retired principal, as many of you know. I'm subbing right now. And it pains my heart that many of our kids are still coming to me, coming to us that they know that they can speak to, and telling us, this is yet what's happening to me. I'm still feeling ostracized. I'm still feeling like belittled. I'm still feeling like I'm lost in this school, in this classroom. This is very real, folks. And when you see people tell us or write articles about an Afrocentric school, then please don't look at it as negatively as some people do. Please consider it. The province of Nova Scotia has an Acadian school, has a Francophone school. They just kept the French school board because that culture is so important. Mine is too. Mine is too. And my kids matter. What you feel today, we felt. Why should you be going through that in 2018? It's real. And stand up, stand strong, and stand united. And let her know that somebody's coming in that school to support you, dear. Somebody's going to show up.
Thank you. Mary Catherine, where are you? Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, first of all, I want to applaud you for having this presentation this evening, and I want to thank all my friends and family and aunties who are sitting on the panel, and you have totally inspired me, and uncles. Al, I want to thank you for bringing back the topic of racism as violence, and we know that we need to keep talking about the impact of racism on our health and well-being. And as a researcher at Dalhousie University, we talk about the impact and how we have some black women who can't get out of bed, who are depressed and full of anxiety. So some of the questions that I have, and it depends on who the panel wants to answer.
Well, I'm going to keep you to one question.
Yeah,
okay,
it's one
because
question.
I want to get, and
this
I'm
is my
only
one
gonna give
question.
one panelist
How do
because I
we
want to keep
challenge, and you have all done a good job. I had two lovely women, Lana McLean and Jackie Barkley, who talked about the challenges in the social services. And then they had women come on and debunk what they said. So how can we fight a system when we're speaking our truth that finds other ways to not let our truth be heard?
Who wants to take that? Elle?
I think it's important to amplify those voices. So we talked about Abdul Abdi just now. His sister was also victimized by the foster care system, and we're not speaking about that. So the question is, like, when we say believe women, we have to believe black women as well. Black people don't make up experiences of racism for the sake of making it up. Nobody, feels good about talking about the terrible things that happened to you. Do you think it's fun to stand up and cry in a room to speak about your pain, as this young girl just did? So we need to understand that people don't lie about their experiences of racism. It's not something that people do just to get attention. And there's this narrative around that. So I think it's very important to understand that the black people actually only talk about 1% of the oppression that we experience, and we swallow 99% of the rest. So the very little you're hearing is the stuff that we can't keep in. So I think it's just important to validate those experiences and to stop being defensive. When people speak about racism, what people hear is, you're calling me a racist, you're attacking me, so therefore I'm going to attack you, discredit you, invalidate you, and do anything I can to silence you. Instead of just saying, this person is speaking a truth, and I need to sit back and listen. And it's not about me. It's not about the kind of person someone is calling me. It's about the oppression that they've experienced. It's about systems of power that they're being victimized by, and I don't need to take that personally. I just need to listen and then act.
We have another question. We have another question on Facebook. Should a greater amount of government-owned land be fast-tracked towards solving the affordable housing crisis? Who wants to look at that? Yeah, go ahead, Irvin.
Yes, absolutely. But when we use the term affordable housing, we have to define the term. And me, myself, personally, I prefer affordable home ownership, not affordable rental housing.
So something that leads toward ownership.
Absolutely. In our community, and we're talking about gentrification in our community, one of the tools to use to fight that gentrification is to build that affordable home ownership in our community so that those who had to go have an opportunity to come back, and those that are still there have an opportunity to stay and own their own land. So of course, government land should be used more for affordable houses.
We've got another question right here. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on something the minister said about being approached by his colleagues about the makeup of the different committees. And also, when you think about the conversation tonight, all of the people involved with putting dumps in place, all of the people who who call schools and tell them to just let people move when they don't want their children to go to school with my child. Now, Dalhousie has made an effort to try and identify a person for a board, and I've listened to different call-in shows, and I've read articles and watched comments on Facebook and Twitter. How do we address the education piece that's required to make people understand that just because that they use the term reversed racism, and I say, if it didn't exist in the first place, how can it be reversed? Okay, so the question, I know it's a rambling question, how do we educate the Twitter people and the Facebook folks to know that just because I'm being offered the job because of the requirements of identification on this committee, that I'm not less qualified to do that job? Anyone want to try and hit that one up?
Who wants to speak to that? Is Elle, I think you have written that.
What I would say is, in this particular instance where Dalhousie has done a job hiring where they've requested racially visible people, you can look at any picture of the Dalhousie Board of Governors, any picture of the administration, and see white man, white man, white man, and that's not a problem. And the minute you say maybe we want somebody else, suddenly we're oppressing everybody else in the world. So I don't know if you can educate people out of realities that they refuse to see. The facts are in front of people. You can walk into any boardroom. Our city council only recently just got a black councillor after 16 years. So if you believe that black people are somehow running this city when black people had no representation in all those rooms were white for years, and that wasn't a problem, I don't see how people are going to pretend it's a problem. Suddenly you have one black woman or one queer woman or one indigenous woman. So I don't think it's a question of educating people. I think it's that what white people like to do is defend whiteness at all costs. And that is the construction of whiteness. Whiteness is constructed in particular ways, and it depends upon other white people defending it. So this is at the heart of whiteness, the idea that whiteness must be preserved and whiteness must police itself, and any threat to that must be attacked. So it's not about us getting jobs. What it's about is white privilege and white supremacy and white people defending that. And that's what needs to happen with that is white people need to do the work of speaking to other white people about that, addressing it in your families, addressing communities, because we can't do that work. White people need to continue to do that work with each other.
We're almost out of time. I'm just going to try to we've got time for just a few other questions. We've got one here. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to scoot in here. I'm sorry. I'm feeling very emotional right now for the young girl there and the 4 young black people that were on the screen earlier in their community with the paintings and so forth. I grew up in the black community. And when we grew up, yes, we were a very tight-knit community, and we believed in it took a village to raise a child. So every elderly person was your aunt or your uncle, and you treated them as your parent. And when you went to school, you treated your teachers because that's what you were taught. You were taught respect from your home. Now, I had the privilege of also serving in my community, working for a large establishment. In that establishment, I was very well qualified, if not overqualified, because as a black person, I felt I had to work 3 times as hard as the white person to be recognized. However, I gave it to them. I gave them everything they wanted. And then one evening, in my community, in my place of employment, I walked in on a conversation. And the conversation was something that had happened earlier before I arrived. And the white girl said to the white group, she had that whole black attitude thing going on. And I'm like, excuse me? And I said, she said, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, oh my God. What do you mean by this whole black attitude thing? Oh, Cheryl, I didn't realize you were there. I'm sorry. I said, you know what? That's okay, but I still want to know. I took it further. Because if you can't have a disagreement without race being brought into it, you know, and without all of us being penalized for what one person does, if you can't have that conversation, and let me tell you, I took it to management. And that's the problem in the workplace in the North End community. Management is not doing their job. They know there's a problem, they admit there's a problem. But when it comes time to do something about it, they turn their heads the other way, they squeeze you out. Guess what? I fought it, guess what? I was squeezed out. But not without a fight, and I won. Okay? And there's all kinds of these incidents going on in the community. They're not isolated incidents. They want to treat them like they are, but they're not. I'm very, very concerned for our young people, and I'm more concerned for our elderly people. Because this racism that's going on in our community, I work in the health field, you guys. And literally, white nurses are, not all, but many, are afraid to wash a black person. It's so bad. It's so bad. Now, this is in our community. It's so bad that one day a white woman who was married to a black man come to visit her husband, and I kept telling her, keep an eye on him. Keep an eye on him, because I was seeing things that I really couldn't tell her because I didn't trust her. However, one night she came in and she washed her husband. And it was a white face cloth and it came back black. And she said to the nurses, what is this black stuff that's coming off my husband? You know what she said? You know what the director said? His color. That's his color. Okay? So, for you people that have elderly parents, family with disabilities, or whatever the case may be in these institutions, I'm telling you right now, I've worked on the inside. I know what's happening. A lot of people refuse to speak out because they need that money. They need to pay bills. I know what it's like. I'm a single parent and I'm a grandparent, and I want my children to have the best of everything. I'm a strong woman because I grew up with a whole lot of support from my community. But you see, of late, our community is not the same anymore. And I'm very, very concerned for our young people and our elderly people. Open your eyes, folks. There's a lot going on out here, and when Dee Dee says it's a mess, you better believe it. You better believe it. When Roddy says, let your voice be heard, let it be heard. There's a lot going on out here, and it's not going to be fixed if we set on it.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going to leave it there. We are going to leave it there. I want to thank the people involved in putting this forum together. This forum was produced by Yamri Tedeza, Pasant Matar, who is also our director, Mary Catherine McIntosh, Leanne Stepnow, Nick McCabe Locos, Kathy Simon, Kathleen Goldhar, Laura O'Brien. Our digital producer is Ruby Buiza. Our technical team is Gary Francis, Bruce Whiteford, PJ McNeil, Andrew Shipley, Susan Hawley, Eric Wiseman, Kenny McDonald, Shane Hayden, Ryan Dunn, Adam Walters, Roy Mumberket, Paul Poirier, and Ian McDonald. Our makeup artist is Rosie Davis. Our photographer is Robert Short. Our camera operators are David Laughlin, Colin King, Mark Crosby, and Peter Sutherland. Special thanks to Mary Link, Chantal Bernard, Nadia Greenidge, and our communications teams in Halifax and Toronto. We're going to give our last word today to Elle Jones, who will debut a new poem she wrote especially for today's town hall. So we're going to leave it with you, Elle. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti in Halifax. Thank you for being part of this special edition of the current Facing Race.
There's discounted black dolls on the shelves at Walmart. So black girls are assigned less value before they even start. A 5-year-old black girl on the news let in handcuffs from class, so we're set up for failure before we can pass. White little girls, they are treated like glass, but the teachers say black girls just have too much sass. Called security to knock a teenage girl from her desk flat on her back. Same as those girls at a pool party police knocked to the grass. Most of the time, when it's us, they don't even keep statistics. Can't find numbers on how many of us dead or missing, so then they tell us our experiences aren't realistic. Say that we ran away when we're kidnapped and trafficked, and then we come home, and they label us ratchet. They taught us histories that said that we're cannibalistic, said that our cultures are backwards and simplistic, so now they claim that their stereotypes are our characteristics. They say we're not worthy of love, not worth being romantic. Say that we're acting so white if we think we're scholastic. Tell us our men won't make it past 25 without prison or the casket. Say it's against his nature to stay when the baby's in blankets. The hashtag on Twitter says, black girls are magic. But too many are born into circumstances that are tragic. They say that we're animals and put us through mental gymnastics. I tell you more of what they do to us, but it's probably too graphic. When we try to talk about our issues, people change the topic, but the Kardashian family uses our bodies for profit. We've been taught to be ashamed. We're told Instagram models are our best path to fame. If I said there's black women astronauts, would you know their names? They deliberately only show some images in the frame. The blood of African queens still flows through our veins, but they'll make you believe we were fashioned for pain. It's not been so long since they had us in chains. I deserve more than the crumbs and whatever remains. Fire burns in my soul and it's lighting the flames, and don't think I'm your savage that you have to tame with our natural hair that's our lioness mane. Where? Cleopatra, returning to reign. But forgetting our heritage fits with their aims. We don't look at black queens and think we're the same. We see too much black booty and really black brains. White people lie to us and say to stay in your lane and don't pull the race card when we try to complain. Got us working twice as hard till our energies drain. Call us angry black women like it's a refrain. Say we're ugly and stupid, attitude and insane. It's like us just existing gives them a migraine. That's why Oscar's so white. Like the Grammys again, show us as mammies or welfare moms hooked on cocaine. If we have a black woman prime minister, maybe I'll crack the champagne, but stop telling black women how much we have gained. But there's little black girls that we're fitting to train. See, black girls aren't just magic, we're hurricanes. And you better believe that they'll bring the propane because we're full of a power that you can't contain.
Everyone, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you so much. Elle Jones, thank you.